Hello everyone, welcome back. I finally have a follow-up review of the Tsprof K02 sharpening system. So that's Tsprof K02 if you're looking up online. Down below I'll have links to my unboxing, which is just that, it's nothing special, and some links to people who have done reviews of it with knives. That's what this device is used for. It's for knives and maybe even longer bladed knives. And for that, the agreement to most every review I've watched, plus from myself, is it is a brilliant design device for sharpening knives. It's got the rotational device, so you don't have to, so if you're doing the edge, you can just flip it and it locks in place. It's very slick. But this video is focusing on, can it be used for long swords? Now, let's stress right away, it was not designed for that. So this review is really just talking about, can you do it? Can you use it for a long sword? Are there any things you need to look into? And are there any things that could be changed on the device to actually make it usable for a long sword? Okay, so the question is, can the device be used to sharpen long swords? Now, I'm going to be splicing in some footage from basically when I got the device till now. So this video may not be as cohesive as I'd like, because this part's being shot later in the year, and I'm trying to make it work with the footage I have. So it should work though. So let's start off by saying the device is built and made and designed to sharpen knives, and maybe longer bladed knives as well. It's not built to sharpen long swords. In short, you can sharpen long swords on it, but there are a lot of variables that are going to make it easy or harder, and some swords that were just too difficult to even try to sharpen on the device itself. So when I was sharpening weapons like a saber or a longer side sword, one-handed weapon, it worked pretty well. I didn't have too much complaints about it. It clearly wasn't designed for that, but it worked. You had to be, play around with it a little bit, but it worked. But when you got to long swords, a lot of the factor came down to how heavy the long sword is, how the blade is designed. So there's generally two types of longsword blades. Diamond blades, where it comes to a peak in the middle, and then blades with a fuller, like this, where it has the fuller built into it to make the blade itself lighter. So these blades determine how the device works. So, and it also, depending on how thick and how narrow the blade goes as well, determines how difficult the device is to use. So I'll be splicing in some footage here to go over a couple things I found out about some different swords I had tried sharpening. So this sword in particular, which is the cold steel Italian longsword, caused quite a bit of problem. In fact, I just stopped trying to sharpen it altogether on the Tsprof K02. The reason is, you can see it has quite an extreme taper to a point, and it stays pretty wide down here. But what caused the biggest problem was this diamond-shaped blade, which isn't uncommon for a longsword, that has an extreme angle down to its edge. No matter how hard I clamped it, or no matter what angle I tried to clamp it in, it can only clamp right on the peak of this. And what would happen is, as I would be sharpening, the vibrations would basically make it come loose constantly, and I could never get a good clamp on it. And or the sword would start to want to move one way or the other. So if the clamp started to slip that way, down that edge, it would drop the angle, right? Or it would do the opposite. I clamped it in there really hard at one point, which allowed this part of the sword to stay pretty good, but then all of a sudden my tip would kind of just sort of pop right out. So I kind of gave up on this one. There might be a better way to do it, but this sword has actually found the limits of the sharpening system. Once again, not a flaw, and I'll go back to the video. So in that clip, that was the cold steel Italian longsword, and this is the cold steel hand and a half longsword. So it's slightly different. And this sword wasn't as difficult to sharpen, even though it does have the diamond blade. It's wider, and the taper from the peak down to the actual blade edge isn't as extreme, and also it stays much wider towards the tip of the sword. So this sword I was able to clamp much better and sharpen. It still did give me a few problems here and there, but I was able to sort through it. This sword gave some other problems, which I'll splice in some video for now. Also with this sword here, which is a lighter sword than the hand and a half sword, but what both these swords share in common is from the crossguard down, they have a lot of weight here. And primarily you're sharpening from here to here. And that's what this next clip will go over. Okay, so I have this clamped onto the unit itself. Let me stress that this isn't the longest of long swords, and it's not the heaviest of long swords. It's only about 3.2 pounds. What this segment of the video is for is this unit usable and capable of sharpening a longsword? The answer is yes. As long as it's not an overly large and heavy longsword, this won't tilt and it won't flip on its own. I have this tightened pretty much as tight as you can go in order for the unit to still work, in order to do the longsword. But nevertheless, you can get a longsword on here, and you can sharpen the longsword. Let's stress when sharpening a longsword, just really quickly, what you're sharpening. Normally, you're focused on this section of the sword for cutting. Anything back there is kind of irrelevant. You shouldn't really be cutting with that section of the sword, and certain techniques do require you to put your hand on the blade. I do sharpen farther back initially when I get the sword, but I usually never touch it again after that. And anything past the middle of the sword only gets sharpened to keep the edge actually consistent and the material I'm taking off the blade consistent the whole way down the blade. The most important part of the sword for sharpening and cutting is over here. So for a blade of this length and a sword of this length, I can get out to the tip, but it puts me at the very extreme end of the arm. Obviously over here isn't much of a concern at all. You can, as you're doing this, move the blade into clamps, but obviously the farther away you move this way to make this part of the blade easier to sharpen, you can't get to the tip. And if you want to make this part of the blade easier to sharpen, you go that way. That's where this unit has a flaw. And the flaw is only when you're pushing this beyond what it's designed for, so it's not really a problem at all. As you'll notice, the blade and the tip move as I rebalance this. The heavier of a unit you have down here for the hilt, the crossguard, the handle, and the pommel, the more it changes the geometry of this. So I have been playing with compensating with this to keep the edge true when it does have too much weight over here. But I think, I'll look on their website, if not I'll contact them, if there was simply a longer arm for this and it had more clamps, so you could put some clamps down here to keep this true, maybe put another clamp somewhere over here to sort of keep this down, basically keep it parallel with the bar. That way, if you have the bar perfectly adjusted, the sword should remain true. Now, once again, let's stress that that's not a flaw of this unit because it's not meant to do long swords. So once again, I've put a saber on this, which is just a relatively shorter, which once again has an even shorter section of the blade you need to sharpen, and it did just fine. It just happens to be when you put longer weapons on here, it's not designed for that. But you can use it for that. And I've already done one edge, and it only took me 15 minutes. I only went 120, 400, 600. You don't really need to go above 600 with a long sword because, let's face it, it's just going through tatami mat. You're going to be ruining the edge anyways. It's not meant for shaving. It's not meant for showing off how sharp it is. So nevertheless, it does work. I'm pretty impressed with it. It's taken away a lot of fatigue because you got to understand when you're using a band sharpener, a band saw, and you've got your sharpening band on there, and you have 4 swords, 4 long swords, each having 4 edges. You need to keep that edge consistent and perfect the whole entire time, and you start getting fatigued when the more weapons you start doing, and you start getting mentally fatigued because you got to remember if you're going from 400 to 1000, that means you got to start again on the exact same edge and not screw up that edge, otherwise you have to start again. And you have to do that for 4 edges on 4 swords, and you can see how that can start becoming quite time consuming and quite taxing. So this eliminates probably 90% of that. The most taxing part of this is kind of getting it all configured and lined up to make sure your sword is relatively where you want. After that, it's just actually kind of meditative, just using the stone on there. It just puts some music on and off you go, and it's actually quite a nice time. So as you can see from that footage, you can sharpen long swords, but I ended up having to put the tripod underneath to keep it sort of balanced because it kept wanting to not turn the device. It was strong enough to do that, but it would just be enough weight that I couldn't clamp it hard enough that it would screw up the edge alignment. So that means your angle would be screwed up. So I was able to use the tripod and the angle device to get it to be balanced. But once again, this sword here, just like the cold steel Italian longsword, has quite a taper to the tip. So I found it difficult to actually sharpen the tip, and it didn't come out very well. Just because of where you had to clamp down here, and then if you needed to clamp up here to keep the sword itself from bending, I couldn't get anything to bite on, and it just kept popping out like that. So, I mean, in conclusion, you can sharpen a longsword on it, but if that's all you're buying it for, I wouldn't suggest buying this device for that. If you're looking for something to sharpen shorter bladed weapons or knives, which is what it's built for, my opinion, 9 or 10 out of 10. Get the device, you can't go wrong. I'm still going to be looking for a device for sharpening because I tend to do a lot of sharpening and it's very fatiguing. I think I found the solution. I just need to save up a little bit of money to purchase that, and when I get it, I'll put up a review. So thanks for watching. I hope this helps. I hope it was a little bit informative, just in case you're one of the people like me who's like, could I buy this for longsword? So thanks for watching. Please keep tuning into my other videos, and have a good day or evening.